Hello and welcome. Good morning to another edition of Shree's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and guest host of Shree's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. We have an incredible show again today. Elizabeth Becker, a former New York Times reporter, former Washington Post reporter as well, and author of You Don't Belong Here, is our guest. She was one of only two Western journalists in Cambodia covering the Khmer Rouge. Sri Srinivasan, of course, is our host. He's the Marshall Loeb Professor at the Stony Brook School of Journalism and co-founder of Digimentors. We'll be talking about Elizabeth's work, her book, and of course, the news this week. You can see the front page. This graphic tells an incredible story about how we're hitting 500,000 COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. We'll also talk about the incredible situation in Texas with the impact of the storm and how people have dealt with the power outages, lack of water, etc. My name is Neil Parekh, and we are so glad to have you here today. Let's see who is watching. The first comment, usually Jonathan Borstein is our first person to comment, but today it's my mom. Hi, Mom. Glad to see you. Thank you for joining us. Doug Levy is here from Northern California. It's early. It's about 5:30 a.m. Eastern time, 5:30 a.m. Pacific time for him. Thank you, Doug. Patricia Freudenberg, always a loyal viewer. Thank you for watching. Sonali Chitre is joining us from Brooklyn. And there's Jonathan Borstein checking in from the East Village. And our good friend Pradnya Haldapur, not too far from me in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm in Springfield, Virginia. Pradnya, good to see you. Diane Stefani joining us from Margate, New Jersey. Deborah Kerr from Fort Lauderdale. It's windy in Fort Lauderdale, but I think it's one of the few places that's warm this week. And let's see who else. Len Lang is joining us from Phnom Penh, Cambodia. So we want to thank everyone watching. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. But this week, we are also live on Elizabeth Becker's Facebook page and her Twitter account as well. So if you're watching on Elizabeth's pages, thank you very much for joining us. This is the Shree's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. We are live every Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And Elizabeth Becker is our guest this week. We'll be getting to her shortly. I want to bring on our host, Sri Srinivasan. Sri, how are you doing today from New York? And one second. There we go. We need to unmute your. There we go, Sri. Sorry about that.
I'm cold, but happy to be with you and our wonderful audience or community that we've built in the more than 5 years that we've been doing this. And so excited to interview Elizabeth Becker today. And just great to say hello to people watching all over the world. Mary Jane in Long Island and Karen Birch in Bath in the UK. Hello, Karen. And Rajni is watching from Toronto. So great to be here with everybody. And Ron, our loyal viewer, supporter, former guest watching from Dubai. It's 5:30. He missed us last week, but always tunes in. And Maria is watching from Scranton, Pennsylvania, the Electric City. And of course, home of Scranton Joe Biden. And Stefan is watching from Ramsey, New Jersey. Stefan is part of our Digimentors team and has a terrific show himself. And want to remind everybody that Neil and I are part of Digimentors, our social, digital, and virtual events consultancy. We put on shows for folks. We do conferences, summits, webinars. So if you want something that goes beyond just Zoom, we'd love to talk to you. You can check out our website at digimentors.group, digimentors.group, or just email me, sri@digimentors.group, or neil@digimentors.group. We'd love to talk to you about working with you. We work with organizations big and small around the world.
Thank you, Sri. And in addition to folks that we mentioned earlier, Janet's watching from Minnesota. And Beth is watching from Dallas, and our hearts go out to everyone, all of our friends and colleagues in Texas, with everything that you're dealing with. And Beth works with the Dallas Morning News, both the Dallas Morning News and the Texas Tribune, Austin,
the Houston Chronicle,
Houston
all of
Chronicle.
those folks. Our hearts go out to all the journalists who were working so hard to put out the news every single day this week. And of course, to all the residents of Texas. What a terrible situation. The
importance of local journalism, absolutely incredible. And as we mentioned local journalism, we should definitely give a shout out to the Local Connection. The Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University brings you the Local Connection newsletter. Each week it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists, and it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips. And Local Connection is put out by one of our producers, Carla Baranauckas. Speaking of our production team, our full production team, of course, Shri is our host. I'm the executive producer and guest host. But rounding out our team are Paula Kiger. You can follow her at Big Green Pen. Steve Taylor at Steve DeReeve. Julia Weeks at Julia L. Weeks. And Carla Baranauckas, as I mentioned earlier. One of the things that we do with our shows is that we have staff watching in Facebook, in LinkedIn, sharing links, adding context, engaging with the audience. So you'll find Paula on Shri's Facebook page, Steve Taylor on Shri's LinkedIn page, and Carla is watching on Elizabeth's Facebook page. So thank you, Carla, for doing that. And we can see Ron Thomas, the A-team. Thank you, Ron. Always appreciate that. I was going to say that, several people who are watching, and I presume most of the folks who are watching from Cambodia, including Florianne Wild, are probably watching on Elizabeth's Facebook page. So again, thank you very much for joining us. The Sunday New York Times Read Along, Shri has been hosting this show for 5 years, more than 5 years now. And we're live every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time with great guest editors, reporters from the New York Times, other publications, authors. So please join us. Please look for us Sunday on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube.
Want to remind everyone that if you missed last week's episode, it was with the editor of the Modern Love column, podcast, and TV show. He was just terrific, Dan Jones. So you can go back in our archives and watch them. They're on my YouTube channel, but also find them elsewhere on our various networks. But please go back and watch that. It was so much fun to learn so much about the Modern Love column and the franchise. And here is at World Professor, our former guest, Professor Greason.
Yes.
Great work, Neil and Sri. Hope to connect with you in the next week.
Thank you. Thank you, Walter. Appreciate that. And Patricia is sharing a quick tip. If you text the word Austin to 7070, you can donate for relief. Don't apologize, Patricia. That's certainly one of the things that we try to do with this show is to provide service to our viewers and to our communities. So thank you for that. So Shri, why don't we take a look at what's in the paper this week and give people a sense of the different sections that we have.
Sure. So we will meet Elizabeth Becker, our special guest, in just a few minutes. We just want to give you a tour of the rest of the Sunday paper. Let's look at Sunday styles. The cover is "The Will to Wed Springs Eternal. Ceremonies never really stop, regardless of the risks. It's not just love, it's business." Big story there, and we have certainly seen that. Pandemic pups swamp trainers. My wife Rupa is just back with our pup, actually 5 years old.
Tara.
Tara. So she's just back, and she was telling me yesterday how there's so many 3 and 6 month old dogs now at the park. So a lot of people have gotten pandemic pups. I hope they take care of them and keep them beyond the time of the pandemic. Unraveling is the Sunday Review cover. The pandemic has been disorienting for everyone.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. Before we leave, you can follow Tara on Instagram, the.Tara.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. The.Tara on Instagram. So thank you. Rupa will be happy to see that plug for Tara. Thank you. So here is the unraveling. The pandemic has been disorienting for everyone, but for the millions of Americans living with dementia, every day can bring fresh horror. Their fragile systems of support and their minds and bodies are coming apart. Kate Englehart's story. And the Sunday business cover is the boredom economy, yet the pandemic is terrible. Yes, the pandemic is terrible. It can also be tedious, and that tedium is shaping how Americans spend money. And where will Limbaugh's 15 million listeners go now? This is about the king of outrage, the man who is responsible for so much of what's happening in political America today, including the rise of Donald Trump and what would happen to his followers. And the at-home cover is We're Lingering Just a Little While Longer. And this is about, I guess, people sleeping in. I don't always get the chance. And our team is working overtime on a Sunday morning. So I'm not sure who's getting to sleep in, but I'm glad some folks are. The Arts and Leisure cover is the artist Lorraine O'Grady first made a splash wielding a whip. She's still making people pay attention. And this is a profile by my friend Siddharth Mitter. So I'm glad to see him here. And that's the cover of Arts and Leisure. Let's see, there's a whole ad that I guess an ad supplement for Putney Student Travel. The New York Times Magazine T. So this is different. There's the Style magazine. This is different from the regular New York Times Magazine. The cover is The Future is Back, Fashion for a Grand Re-Entrance. And this is as big as any magazine you will see in terms of advertising and how it's done. Neil, one day we should get someone from the magazine, from T, to talk about the work that they do.
Absolutely.
And the Sunday Styles cover is, we saw that already. The book cover is The New Not Normal by Chanel Miller, reviewing Between Two Kingdoms, a memoir of a life interrupted by Suleika Jawad. And the Metropolitan cover is about pigeon keepers, tough times for X, right? You could do that for any industry, but here they're talking about gentrification and vicious hawks can't dissuade a bird-loving fraternity. And where Cicely Tyson went, wherever Cicely Tyson went, Harlem was home. And this is about Cicely Tyson's fame all over the world and about her special love for Harlem and Harlem's love for her. And let's see, the real estate cover is Bought and Sold Online. Tech smarts and tools are required for remote transactions. Like, people are, in fact, doing that during the pandemic. So interesting, useful tools here for people who are in the hunt for a house. And then the Times Magazine, before we come to the front page, is the Amazon Awakening. COVID-19 has cemented the company's hold on the economy, but it has also spurred employees to organize. And it's been fascinating to watch some of the coverage of the organizing efforts. This is the Future of Work issue of the Times Magazine. And so if we have time later, we'll go to some of these sections, and Elizabeth will get to pick what she wants us to read together. And we'll just glance at the front page of the Times before bringing Elizabeth on. The lead story, Storms Exposing a Nation Primed for Catastrophe, Climate Change Wrath, Unprepared for Threats Facing Power Grids, Water, and Roads. Garland faces resurgent peril of extremism. Oklahoma City attack shaped his views. Lack of birth control deepens women's burden in Venezuela. Russia fears but can't quit open internet. And this is the dramatic story you see on the front page. U.S. virus deaths nearing 500,000 in just 1 year. More than 3 wars. That's number of people have died of more than 3 wars. Empty spaces in cities, towns, restaurants, homes, and hearts. And the way they have put this together is to look at how long it took to get 50,000 deaths, or tranches of 50,000 deaths. Here, the first 50,000 took 55 days. This is in America. Next, 33 days, then 63 days through July. 55 days after that. 57 days, 26 days, 19 days, 17, and 15 days. And as of 10 p.m. last night, 497,000 Americans had died. So just to think about how fast that's happened, and I know Neil remembers the special episode we did when the 100,000 mark happened and the New York Times listed 1,000 people on the front page, or they highlighted 1,000 people in the paper to talk about this. And now here we are, 500,000. It is stunning, less than a year later.
While you're doing that, Sri, I'm showing the PDF of the front page. Yeah. What's remarkable to me is how dense those dots are. Each dot represents a single death. You look at that January 19th, 401,000 mark, how dense those dots are. It's just incredible to look at. And, really want to give a shout out to the New York Times design team for sharing this. And what's interesting is not only this was shared, they gave us an early view of the PDF yesterday afternoon, but it was embargoed until midnight. And the article that goes with it, Julie Bosman's article about empty spaces, which you see on the top left, the U.S. virus test nearing 500,000. They didn't put that online until 3 a.m. this morning. So it was it's a very powerful story. I definitely, we definitely want to take a look at the inside of the paper. And when you look at it online as well, all the pictures that go with it.
All right. With that, let's bring on our guest, Elizabeth Becker, who's been very patiently waiting for us to get started. And let's say good morning.
And of course, as a reminder, our guest is Elizabeth Becker, former New York Times reporter and author of You Don't Belong Here, How Three Women Rewrote the Story of War. In addition to working with the Times, she also worked with the Washington Post and NPR. So with that, we will bring Elizabeth on.
Good morning. Hi, good morning. Nice to see you.
Great. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for being here. We should tell everybody your book is coming out in the next few days, and it's very, very exciting. So everyone should check that out.
Thank you.
First, welcome. Tell us how you're doing and how you've handled the pandemic.
Well, thank you again for inviting me. I live in Washington, D.C., 3 blocks from the Capitol. So it's been a very special, this is the best way I could say it, experience. As a freelance writer, in the last few years, I'm used to being alone, so it's fine. And as an older writer, I've already had 2 vaccinations, so I'm doing okay. But as I said, I live 3 blocks from the Capitol, so we were on lockdown on January 6th, and our neighborhood is still, and I saw one of the robots across the street looking for a bomb. So that's colored everything, and our neighborhood is scarred by all those fences with barbed wire on it still. In our neighborhood, it's horrible.
Thank you for taking the time to be with us to talk about your new book. Tell us about it, please. Explain the title also. Well,
it's a history of the Vietnam War, in a sense, told through the story of these 3 amazing women, and they came at the beginning war in the middle 60s, 66 to be exact. Catherine Leroy, a French photographer, Francis Fitzgerald, an American magazine writer, and Kate Webb, an Australian reporter. They came without jobs because women were not sent overseas in that era. And they had to pay their own way. And when they arrived there, they were told, you don't belong here, in so many words, sometimes those words exactly, some more gracious, some more loathsome. And that's where the title comes from. Everybody was told, you don't belong here. This is men fight wars and men cover wars.
And tell us about this photograph that we're looking at.
That's from the cover of my webpage. And that's a group of us covering the war in Cambodia. I'm in the middle where it's the noodle stop we had just covered the last bit of a battle. And you stop at a local place to have noodles. Neil Davis is a very well-known television reporter, is the blonde man to my left, and Christine Spangler, the one woman you see, is a French photojournalist, and that's a typical scene during war.
Thank you. We also want to point out it's gotten great reviews and advanced publicity. So let's look at some of the comments that have come in. Geraldine Brooks says, this is riveting and just great to say. It has so much to say about the nature of war and the different ways men and women correspondents cover it. And Anne Garrels, the former foreign correspondent of NPR and author of Naked in Baghdad, says, every journalist should read the stunning book. Actually, everyone should. Elizabeth Becker has that rare ability to weave the fascinating stories of three groundbreaking, very different women journalists with a riveting history of the Vietnam War. She challenges you to see who these women were in a place they allegedly didn't belong, while describing what and how they witnessed it. So that's just awesome. And this is Foreign Policy, talking about your book, and says that how three women broke into the uber macho world of war reporting, and tell the story of three trailblazers who cleared the way for generations of female journalists after them. And you're seeing, so tell us about these women and these photographs we're seeing here too.
The woman to the left with very short hair is Kate Webb, the Australian, and she was a philosophy graduate from Melbourne. She'd had what we would call in America a copy desk. She was a copy boy to pay back a student debt, and while she was ferrying copy around a newsroom, the Mirror in Australia, Sydney, she started reading about the Vietnam War. And Australia is one of only two countries that were allied with sent soldiers to the war with the United States. The other was South Korea. And she just got it in her head to go there. She took her typewriter, flew to Saigon, and spent almost a year trying to get work, being told to her face, why would I hire a woman? And she finally really broke through by being one of the first at the U.S. Embassy during the Tet Offensive of 1968. And her reporting was brilliant. And she coined the phrase that the embassy looked like a butcher shop in Eden. The next woman is Frances Fitzgerald, Frankie, and totally different background, an American from a very privileged family, patrician, wealthy. And she also, in America, couldn't get a regular kind of reporting job. She was told by Newsweek that women were only good for research, not for writing. So she bought a ticket to Saigon, and she broke through by looking at war in the widest of lenses. She looked at war at how it was fit into the Vietnamese landscape, the culture and the people and the history. And she was writing articles that no one else was writing it and sending them in very long form, in the days when long form narrative journalism was rare. She would write for anybody, Vogue, British news magazines, and ended up writing a major piece for Atlantic. She then went back to the United States, did a lot of research, and wrote Fire in the Lake, which won more honors, about the one book that won the most honors about the Vietnam War, Fire in the Lake, and published in 1972, Pulitzer, National Book Award, the Bangkok History Award. And then the last one, the petite woman in a parachute outfit, is Catherine Leroy. And in some ways, she's the most compelling. She was barely 5 feet tall, couldn't keep on 100 pounds. She was tiny. Dropped out of high school in France. She grew up in a suburb outside of Paris. And instead, she concentrated on becoming an accomplished pianist and also becoming a parachute jumper. She arrived in Saigon on her own, paying her own way, with a Leica camera tied around her neck with a shoelace. Nobody gave her a single chance, but she was determined, spent a lot of time in the battlefield, and that's how she learned her craft. She didn't speak English, so her French was Marine, so her English was Marine's English with a lot of unprintable words with a cool Parisian accent. Within a year, she was selling photographs that no one else had ever taken. Horst Voss, the great AP Associated Press photo editor, commented, "I've never seen pictures like this before." So by the end, she became the first woman photographer to win the George Polk Award Photography and the first one to win the very esteemed Robert Capa Gold Medal Award in Photography. And the point about this book is that these women have been more or less forgotten in the story of Vietnam and the story of the journalists who covered the war. So that was the impulse for me to write them, and because I felt I owed a debt to them because I've literally followed in their footsteps. I write in the introduction that through a friend, Kate was waiting for me in Hong Kong on my way to try to become a journalist myself. In my backpack was Fire in the Lake, the book by Frankie. And once I got to Cambodia and started working with a couple of French women photographers, I learned about Katrine. So, and the sacrifices they made, what they put up with, some of the hardships, and in the case of Kate and Katrine, the PTSD they suffered through the rest of their lives. I just thought it was one of those stories that journalists should know, and I think the way they covered the war will tell you a lot about the war itself. And it's obviously, March is Women's History Month, and I think these women belong in our history, and that's what inspired me to write this book, Patricia.
Thank you for telling us that story, and it's so important for folks to understand that there were women journalists covering the Vietnam War. Almost all the documentaries and the stories you hear about the coverage is almost always about men and the men doing the coverage. So of course there were the majority, but it's important that we are now able to understand the role that women played. So you said that you followed in their footsteps. Give us a sense of the stories that you did, the wars you covered, and we have some photographs also to go with that.
I arrived towards the end of the war in January of 1973, and I had just left graduate school where I was studying South Asia, Shri. I actually learned Hindi at some stage. Anyway, so, and Cambodia was on my mind for a couple of reasons. It's one of the countries of Southeast Asia most influenced by India, so I'd studied it. And also, it was the focus of the war by then because the American bombing had intensified tremendously over Cambodia after the signing of the Paris Peace Accords of January 1973. So, and I also had a friend there who I met in India when I was a student there, and Silvana Foa, and she put me up at the beginning. And so I had that's always critical, this unseen, invisible women's network. And I started learning how to cover a war. And I can't tell you how lucky I was with my instructors, because since it was one of the stories of that year and the next year, some of the best reporters were there. So for instance, from the New York Times, Malcolm Brown, Sidney Schamberg, and from the Post, my bosses were David Greenway and Tom Lippman, and LA Times was Jacques Leslie, Ed Bradley of CBS. What better teachers do you have? And so I was the only one of all of these people I just mentioned who lived in Cambodia. So I got to do a lot of in-depth stories about Cambodians, and that visiting journalists never have time to do. And I did my biggest investigations were on whether or not the Americans were actually obeying the rules, which they were not, and who were the Khmer Rouge, because unlike the Vietnamese communists, very little was known about them. So I did the first piece profiling the man who would become known as Pol Pot, but was then known as Solat Sar. And it was scary even then, because they were on the sections of Cambodia controlled by them. It was clearly ruthless, it was cruel, but it was popular to a certain degree. And it was clear that they were going to win. And that's a hard story to write. That was a very hard story to write. Also surprising was the antipathy with the Vietnamese, which wasn't known then. It was just beginning to find out. So it was very, very hard, and it was dangerous. And as I said, I concentrated on the Cambodians, what was affecting the Cambodians, and then the Americans. I left several months earlier because it was too dangerous, and it was very difficult to be a woman covering that war.
Thank you for sharing this. And that photograph is a picture you took of one of the people who'd go on to kill so many millions of his own people. So for some of our younger audience members who don't know Pol Pot, maybe you can talk a little bit about him, and what was it like to be in his presence?
I met and interviewed him at the very end of the Khmer Rouge regime. So I was, sufficiently terrified in a way. I was one of 2 journalists who were allowed to come into Cambodia that time. And it was like walking into a court with a king. He was sitting in a big armchair and wanted to lecture us. Interview is what it was called, but it was more listening to a lecture. And by then we had just a hint. We knew that it was essentially, he had turned the country into a labor camp. We would discover later nearly 2 million of an estimated 5 million Cambodians had died directly because of what he had done. People were thrown out of the cities on the first day of the revolution, sent to labor camps. Many starved to death. They had horrible living conditions. In order to control it and turn it into a very facile idea of what revolution and an equal society. It was equal in the sense that everybody was treated badly. And so we were there. You're seeing a picture of myself the man with the camera strap, the bald man, is Richard Dudman from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And the man with the curly hair is a Professor Malcolm Caldwell from the United Kingdom. And this is on the front line as the Vietnamese are invading. So you had a country that was just about to be invaded, and we were the first and the last ones in, so to speak. And on our last night, after we had interviewed Pol Pot, we packed our bags. It was time, we were going to leave in the morning to go back home. The government sent some gunmen in, and they attacked us in our guest house. I was the first one that they pointed a gun at, and I went and hid. And then the gunman went upstairs, threatened Dudman, and then went into the bedroom of Malcolm and murdered him, and fled. And we heard a lot of gunshots, but we weren't rescued for 3 or 4 hours. And that was my tiniest hint of what the Cambodians had gone through for almost 4 years. And it was awful.
Well, now this has been so terrifying.
Yep. Yes. So, this is on that trip. And this is in the lovely Bante Sre temple in the Angkor complex, and which has now become, one of the major tourist attractions in the world. And that's a group of us. And this was just a few days before what I just described. And Malcolm is the man in the black shirt in the back.
Wow. And this is from Columbia Journalism Review in an article in 2016. And thanks to Neil for putting all these cards together to able to tell Elizabeth's story. Folks, if you're just joining us, we are interviewing Elizabeth Becker, former New York Times reporter and author of a brand new book that's coming out this week called You Don't Belong Here: How Three Women Rewrote the Story of War. And you will definitely want to read this. Here's a comment from Neil's mom who's watching. Elizabeth, these three women are known because of your book. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to know about their devotion. Meanwhile, my mom is also watching in Kerala, India. And so, hi, Amma, love you. And in your South Asia studies, did you actually get to South Asia?
Yeah, I even got to Kerala.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yes. And I studied in Agra at the Kendriya Hindi Sansthan, which was, I don't think it still exists, but it was a government school set up by the Indian government to teach non-Hindi speaking bureaucrats Hindi. So as an experiment, they let 4 of us Americans in on the classes, and it was wonderful. Because if nothing else, I knew how to say arda, arda, arda.
What years were these? What
a long time ago, 1970, 71.
Okay. And we Paula Kiger, one of our producers, says moms are the best, and she is a terrific mom herself, so she knows that. Let's just look at some of the other comments coming in here. Tim is watching from a brisky, snowy Pennsylvania. Hi, Tim. Glad you're here. We are seeing a comment from Holland, Mississippi, right? Holland, Mississippi?
Michigan.
Sorry, Holland, Michigan. I get the M-I, M-O, and M-S confused all the time. So Cynthia, greetings from, thank you for being here from Michigan. And Eve is here from Charlotte, North Carolina. And there's so many great comments coming in here, folks. Please tag a friend, someone who would benefit from watching this on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or LinkedIn, and they can watch this right away. It will run as soon as we're off the air in about less than an hour. It will run again, and they can watch it. So please share this with your friends, as Elizabeth has done on Twitter and our channels. Here are some of the other questions that have come in, and Francesca is asking, what can we learn from your amazing experiences as a journalist? Of course, we want everyone to get your book, but what are some things that people can learn that is relevant to journalism today and to consumption of news? So if you're a reader or a journalist, why should they learn from you?
Well, the 3 women were all became, not only broke through the barriers, but became extraordinary reporters because they looked beyond the confines of the battlefield. They broadened how you look at a war, so that it's not just the political leaders and the military leaders, but it's the people. So I think you learn as a journalist. There's Katrine at the top, and Frankie and Kate. You learn as a journalist that the human story, the cultural story, is at least as important as following the military. And you're going to learn a lot more, the economy. You're going to learn a lot more if you do contextualize it with the real people, the Vietnamese, etc. They have real voices. The Cambodians have real voices, and that's a lesson I learned, that you cannot get too local. You cannot have too many sources within the community and beyond the usual suspects. So as a journalist, that was a very good beginning for me, and these women were superior at it. Later on, I've heard so many other journalists say that, like Frankie's book was seminal, looking at Vietnam as a country and not just as a battlefield. That Kate, as a journalist, to become the first combat reporter assigned as bureau chief within a war. She's the first woman to do that. And she did it by following the South Vietnamese army, which was not going to give you headlines, but was going to tell you which way the war was going. So I guess it's what I said earlier, the bigger lens. And when you read a story about war, you're going to find that the reporter that does tell you those clues to what's going on is going to be the reporter that's going to probably give a more clear and honest view of the war itself.
Thank you. Rose Horowitz, who's on our team at Digimentors is watching from Connecticut and tweeting live at Rose Horowitz 31. She says she's quoting what men used to say about women journalists. They're only good for research, not writing. And these women were more or less forgotten in the telling of the Vietnam War. And Rose runs a hashtag called Women to Follow on Twitter, and everyone should check that out. Naomi Service has a question. Did you have any encounters with Dith Pran, the legendary journalist?
Oh, he was my first best buddy. When I arrived with, no money to speak of and just earning a little bit, Pran came up to me. And we were a very small permanent press corps, very, very small permanent press corps. Most of the reporters came and went, and Pran was already the stringer for the Times. And he came up to me one day and said, "Becker, I think you're serious. I don't think you're just one of those hippies coming in and out. So you can use my car, a little green Volkswagen Bug, for a month, and that'll help you because you can't keep going around in cyclobuses, these little cabs that human." Yeah. And I said, "You're kidding, Pran." And he said, "You're going to make it, but you need some help." And so, of all the press corps, the person who gave me my first leg up was Pran, and a more generous, thoughtful guy you could never have met. I mean, and we used to run each other in the newsroom in the New York Times, and it was like seeing a long lost relative whenever we ran into each other. Just can't say enough about him. So yeah, I knew Pran.
And he was the subject, of course, of The Killing Fields, that famous movie. And
Right.
people can take a look. And here are some other books that you've written. So if you want to talk a little bit about them.
I'll talk the first one that's sort of the odd book out, and it was my last book. I was, my last beat at the New York Times was international economics, and it was during the global, the big push, the beginning of the globalization. And I noticed in my coverage of trade and all the other changes because of globalization that one of the industries that was really taking off was travel and tourism, but it wasn't, it was something that was sort of more or less being ignored. So when I left daily journalism, I wanted to look at that and did years of research and what they call investigation, but it's just basic research to discover just what an extraordinary influence it was having on the environment, on social, the overcrowding, all that sort of thing. And so it became a real passion for me. And then once it came out, then the terms over tourism started trending, and people began to see that travel and tourism was out of control for too many places on this planet. And I think, and also obviously climate change was an issue, and I think it's going to continue to be an issue on this, on travel and tourism, and I hope lots of governments start paying attention. And just as a side note, in the November elections, one of the things that people may not have noticed is that the town of Key West used the November elections to pass a memorandum, to pass a new law to limit the number of cruise ships that can dock there. They would not allow any more big cruise ships, and only small, environmentally friendly cruise ships will dock. Okay, the next book, When the War
By the
Was
way,
Over.
before you go, Jonathan Borstein, who's watching from the East Village, says Overbooked is one of the best, if not the best book on the subject of tourism.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. The next book is sort of like my, it was my first, and I threw everything into it. It's the story of the war and the Khmer Rouge Revolution, and it's funny. My husband just reminded me that I told the history, and to contextualize it, I used profiles of the Cambodians, which people aren't familiar with the culture or the history. So I picked out different personalities, and I'm happy to say that it was first published in 1986. And now it's 2001. It's still in print, and it was it's almost hard for me to talk about it because I put so much into it. But it's the history. You'll understand where Pol Pot came from. You'll understand the American role, having the Vietnam War next to Cambodia all that time. And that leads me to the next book, Bopana. Now, she's one of the women I profile in When the War Was Over. And I was able to profile her through her torture record at Tuol Sleng, the central prison of the Khmer Rouge. And that sounds hideous, maybe, but, and it was. I mean, all the research got to me right down to my bones. But so Bopana, I went to the Tuol Sleng and I wanted to find a woman who would have been about my age and who I might have known in Phnom Penh during the war. And I asked for this file, and it turned out to be the biggest file in the whole Tuol Sleng operation. She was taken to be tortured and killed because she did the horrible thing of standing up to the Khmer Rouge and wanting to be with her husband. So there are love letters there, all kinds of clues to what it was like. And in the process of torture, people are first told to write the confessions of their lives. And everybody thinks that they tell the truth, then they'll be saved because they know they didn't do anything wrong. So the first confessions are a very good jumping off point for us researchers to know what they went through. And then there were the letters as well. And I was able to develop this whole story of her. Fast forward, at a young movie director named Riti Pan, Cambodian living in Paris, fell in love with Bopana. And she became his muse. He did a movie of her and named his audiovisual institute for all movies in Cambodia after her. So if you go to Phnom Penh, go to the Bopana Center and think of this wonderful woman who just left this amazing memory and then was tortured and murdered. And the final book I wrote when my children were young. And research was out of the question in terms of spending time away from them. And it's a young adult history for sort of junior high school age kids, America's Vietnam War narrative history. So you can see what I've been interested in.
Well, thank you for all that incredible work and for sharing the background of all of these books. And folks can find this on your website, elizabethbecker.com/books, and you can see these great reviews of these books as well. And Mark Bowden, who of course wrote Black Hawk Down, gave it a great blurb as well. So let's look a little bit at the news of the day and just get your thoughts on what you think of the paper and just the array of the news arrayed in front of you here. When you were working in the Post and the Times, what was your sense of how long print would still be around? Are you surprised to see this? Are you what is your relationship with the print paper these days?
Subscriber every morning. The Post and the Times every day, and the Wall Street Journal on the weekend on Saturday. So I'm in love with of paper. I'll be sad when it goes, but I know the paper well online as well. So what struck me this morning was a sense of reckoning. Look at that. It's impossible to imagine 500,000 people, all three wars, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, 500,000 people, and no other country proportionally has anything. We have the most to begin with, and proportionally, it's horrible. So it's a reckoning of our failure as a government to deal with this. And then on the other side, you have the climate crisis that we see now it's in Texas. Before it was in California. There was a very good nut graph, or what do we call it in non-jargon? There's a very great explaining paragraph there, Shri, if you wanted to show it, about that we have to get used to this, that we're in the middle of a climate crisis.
Yeah, let me read that, Elizabeth. The crisis carries a profound warning. As climate change brings more frequent and intense storms, floods, and heat waves, wildfires, and other extreme events, it is placing growing stress on the foundations of the country's economy, its network of roads and railways, drinking water systems, power plants, electrical grids, industrial waste sites, and even homes. Failures in just one sector can set off a domino effect of breakdowns in hard to predict ways. And this is, by the way, imagining that the government wants to help you and to do good things. We know that in Texas, it's not true, because Texas, several folks who have run Texas have insisted on having a separate electric grid. There are only 3 electric grids in the 48 contiguous states: East, West, and Texas. And that's because they didn't want to be regulated by the feds. And so you're seeing the effect of that. So we presume that the government wants to help. The government wants to do the right thing. And here you're seeing the impact of that.
And the sense of reckoning is that you have the virus on the off lead and Texas on the lead. They're framing each other, and they are connected. There's no question that the pandemic, as every expert will tell you, this will not be the first pandemic of the globalization era. That with globalization, with all of what we have done as humans, we're going to see more pandemics, and obviously the climate crisis as well. So you read that and you say, whoa, we have to even be more serious. And Shri, you just said that, people think government will help you, so on and so forth. That's up for grabs. I mean, we can't forget January 6th, which leads us to the next story, Merrick Garland. January 6th was all about, no, we don't like the federal government, and we're going to show whatever, the attempted coup, the attack on our government and our democracy. So that's a lovely profile by Mark Leibovich. It's right on point, because this man who was denied a seat on the Supreme Court turns out to be the man we need right now, head of Justice Department, because he was a prosecutor for Oklahoma City. Now, one man, he's now got hundreds that he's going to have to prosecute, but he understands that strain in American politics of no government, stand your ground. The slogans are all the same. They tend to be racist. They tend to homophobic, racist, misogynist, and frightening and hard for our democracy. So, the top of the paper this morning, you'd say, oh my gosh, I need another cup of coffee. This is serious what we're into. The news is not going to get better for a long time. And then now you go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to say, for those who are joining us late, what you're seeing on the front page of the paper is a look at the toll of 500,000 deaths in America. Each dot you see here represents one person who died, and how long it took to get to 50,000 deaths. And so it took 55 days. At one point, it took 33 days, 63 days. But in the last few weeks, 19 days, 17 days, 15 days. And we keep hearing about how things are better now and people are more optimistic, including me. But then when you see this, you see how much of a problem it is. Yes, things are down, but they're still higher than some of the summer and fall peaks that we saw.
You went past Venezuela.
Yeah, the Venezuela story. Go ahead, talk about that.
I mean, I was not surprised by any of the other stories, but that one really shocked me. That you have the women without birth control, and they're having children they can't feed. The emergency, it's just as a woman, of course, it's just heartbreaking for me, because of all the problems Venezuela has now, to be denied birth control and to have these poor children and these mothers and fathers unable to feed them, it's a crime. And I must say, I'm really happy that one of the first things that the Biden-Harris administration did was to put birth control back into our foreign aid, and it can't come a day too soon.
And just to illustrate the problem here, birth control. Wait 1 second. So a pack of 3 condoms costs $4.40 in Caracas, 3 times Venezuela's monthly minimum wage of $1.50. So not daily minimum wage or hourly minimum wage. It says monthly minimum wage of $1.50. And birth control pills can cost twice as much as that. So this is just really stunning to see that, and you can obviously imagine the impact of that. Here we are just going into the paper and just pull out some things here. Feel free to jump in and comment at anything that I show, or even things I missed. Glenn orbits Earth 3 times safely. This was John Glenn in 1962, and an article about how to make your car smarter, cheap ways to make your car smarter. One of the things, Elizabeth, at the Times does these small how-to and helpful hints kind of thing. And so that's what you're seeing here. Application deluge for top colleges, a drought for the rest. And so we're seeing a story about so many industries have been affected badly, but here you're seeing what's happening with colleges and college applications.
And I think it's the continuing theme that inequality is growing dramatically during the pandemic, because these are the top colleges are getting inundated, and the other colleges and the kinds of colleges that a lot of us went to are not. And one of the reasons is that the pandemic, the wealthy got wealthier and the poor got desperate. So the people who would be going to the less expensive colleges now don't have the money. And that's one of the things that will be has to be watched very carefully, because inequality is one of the key marks of a country that's in trouble.
Yeah, and we're certainly seeing that here. Here's an unusual ad from Facebook asking for regulations. It says the last time internet regulations were passed, people said, fax it to me. So it's talking about the 25 years since comprehensive internet regulations. And I'll show you in a little while my newsletter for today this week's newsletter is about Facebook and Google. Let's keep going here. Here's an unusual ad from Lego Education and Rebuild Confidence. It's about developing critical thinking for your students. Indoor dining has resumed, but rush to come and sit and eat hasn't. Tell us how you've been handling dining and cooking during the break.
I'm really tired of cooking. We cook at home. We do not dine out. We do carry out. We become adept at knowing which restaurants have the kind of food that works in carry out. And there's no reason to go yet. So we're part of the group that the article points out that are very, very wary of going inside. We'll go out in the warmer weather. Of course, we went outside, but not inside, not yet, no.
Folks, we have several questions that have come in for Elizabeth. We'll come to them in just a minute. We're just going through the paper and some unusual headlines. Israel secretly agrees to buy vaccines for Syria as part of prisoner swap. Your thoughts?
Not bad. That's a good.
Another Olympics invitation from China, like it or not, Beijing defies calls for boycott in 2022. The other Olympic story, obviously much bigger than this at the moment, is Japan. The Tokyo Olympics. I've been following that carefully. I was born in Tokyo. Ooh. And one of the things that we've seen, a woman has been put in charge of the of the Summer Olympics after a scandal involving a man who said that women should talk less in these committee meetings. And she is one of the first women to run a major Japanese institution of any kind. And that's why that's standing out. She's also a former bronze medalist at the Olympics herself. Mm-hmm. And let's keep going. Canada's highest court to rule on whether a comedian went too far. Hong Kong tries to rein in broadcaster. Prophet's tomb beckons believers and birds. This is about the prophet Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know the prophet Joshua is. It says here, despite no proof Joshua existed, multitudes visit his tomb. Did you know it's World Kombucha Day?
Nope.
And let's keep going here. 2 shot dead as protests turned bloody in Myanmar.
Now that's a story I'm watching very carefully. I presume you are too, Shri. It's how much more can the country take? And I was amazed at how quickly the people said, no, we don't want another coup. We're tired of the generals, and they haven't given up. And it's terrifying. You of course hope that they win, but the odds are very, very tough. And it's in a neighborhood, Southeast Asia, where you have Thailand's essentially run by the military. Hun Sen runs Cambodia because he controls the military in the other part. It's not a place where democracy thrives easily. So very important what's going on there. Very important.
I lived in Myanmar when it was Burma as a teenager, and
Ooh.
life was very tough there. During that set of military, when the military was ruling there. By the way, I just want to say about kombucha. This is not something I knew much about until it became a craze in the last few years. But I always heard the word Kampuchea, which was the old name for Cambodia, and wondered if there was a connection. For all the 2020 success, Democrats ask what went wrong. And this is mainly about the House seats where they lost ground, even though they won the Senate and, of course, the presidency. Here's Vice News. This is winner of the Columbia DuPont Award, the DuPont Columbia Excellence in Journalism Award for India Burning.
Right.
And I have not seen this, but this is documenting the dangerous political rhetoric and protests that embroil the country after the passage of the Citizenship Amendment Act. Let's keep going here. We'll look at A Musical Life Gave a Soul to the Universe. This is Cornelia Vertenstein, 93. She died on February 12th. Seeking Human Stories, a reporter finds the story of humanity. Let's keep going here. Here are some of the pictures of the storm that we talked about and the impact of this.
It's hard to fathom.
Yeah.
It takes like the example of that you can't forget of the 10-year-old boy who loved playing in the snow, went to bed, and in the morning the parents found him dead from hypothermia. I mean, that's what sort of brings it right down to the horribleness.
Yeah, here are 2 stories. Gender equity gets a seat in the White House, and Clinton says council is a critical first step towards helping women. And this is about the Gender Policy Council. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I didn't. That's one where I learned quite a bit about. I had no idea she had worked like that on that issue when she was First Lady. We all remember her in Beijing when she said women's rights is human rights. But this was. She got a couple points, I think, for this. I mean, she was doing more than we all realized behind the scenes.
I'm a big fan of obituaries, if it's okay to say that, so I always read them. What are your connection to obituaries?
Oh, I loved it when when I went back to America after the war and worked at the Post, when I was assigned, you in those days, everybody does obits as part of your getting to know the Post, and I loved it. It's like short story writing, but it's also history. So I'm a big fan as well. I love the back page of The Economist, their obit, but the obit I read online that I really liked was the nun, Diane Ortiz, that Catherine Seeley wrote. And she was tortured and almost died in Guatemala. And Catherine Seeley managed to turn that obit into a really dramatic and moving story about a meaningful life in a way that you would never have thought about. And the American connection to Guatemala torture squads, and in just a short way. And you learn or you remember, and so I'm a big fan as well.
And that's the story of Sister Ortiz is so powerful and really important for people to read. For those who think America always does the right thing, you know about America's history in the Middle East and other places, but this particular story and how after she was captured, burned 111 times with cigarettes and gang raped, people didn't believe her. The government didn't believe her, and others didn't believe her, and she had to sue and won a judgment against a minister in Guatemala. And then there's a piece of history in here where he would escape and not be punished, but then he died by a swarm of bees killed him. Is this in the story? And you think about justice delayed, but justice somehow being gotten for Diana Ortiz. This really amazing obit, and just what a life.
She recovered with great difficulty, and then she decided to use that recovery to start a whole torture center to help other people who've gone through what she went through. So it was, Kit wrote that she had a yearning to be a nun. Well, she turned that into a mission to help torture victims. This extraordinary woman.
Thank you. By the way, lovely story here about Trebek's wardrobe. This is Alex Trebek's wardrobe, has been donated to men rebuilding their lives, and talks about his 14 sweaters and 300 shirts, and all of that being donated to men as they get ready for job interviews and things. And here's an obit that you wrote.
With Seth Meiden's great colleague.
Tell us about this.
When you're at the Times, they ask you to do advance obits. And because of my background, they asked me to do the advance obit of Norodom Sihanouk. And it's a really great exercise because I'd interviewed him many times. He sometimes he loved me, sometimes he thought I was a horrible person, but he was just bigger than life. He head of a very small country, but he became very famous. He tried really hard to keep Cambodia neutral during the war. So all that being said, I had to reduce this amazing life into 1,200 words, which I did. And of course, he died after I'd left the Times. So Seth Meidens became my co-writer to fill in the blanks. And it's a wonderful exercise. As you said, you really grow to appreciate an obit.
In an earlier episode, we had Amy Padnani join us. Amy is an obit editor at the Times, and she started the Overlooked series, and about women and people of color who had been ignored by the Times in the past. By the way, just looking at the story, in the land of Lincoln, monuments are under review. That Lincoln, whose legacy is being questioned even in Illinois. What do you make of that? Of calling into question. You saw the story out of San Francisco where they want to rename schools.
I am totally of two minds on this one. Like Lincoln, whatever flaws you want to bring into it, I would not. He did sign the Emancipation Proclamations. But on the whole, I think particularly in the South, it's a very important exercise because most of the Confederate statues, memorials were done long after the end of the Civil War, and they were done to keep the legacy of the Confederates alive, and that's had a horrible effect on our country. It's the root of Jim Crow. It institutionalized all that sort of stuff. So in general, yes, for the Confederacy, but I think I'm I have open questions about some of the rest.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes left, and we have a lot of the paper to get through, but we do have a question that's come in from Dixon Osborne. What
Dixon.
advice do you have to respond to the attacks on press freedom in the US and globally?
Okay, hi Dixon. As a reporter, I covered him on many different beats, but he's one who stands up for the freedom of the press. We have to assert ourselves. I think towards the end of the Trump administration, journalists were banding together to protect each other, which I think is important. That journalists should not be picked off one by one, organization by organization. That we do have to stand up as an institution. We're protected by the First Amendment, and if we're going to keep that First Amendment, we have to band together. So we already know about the Committee to Protect Journalists, which we all support, and it's a great institution. But we just thought of it as overseas. Well, it's not just overseas; it's here. And the more we think as part of an institution and protecting each other, the better. And there's all kinds of strategies. And Ben Smith at the Times, Margaret Sullivan at the Post, everybody at Columbia Journalism Review, there's all kinds of people with great ideas, but it has to be fought back. And I'm quite happy that the phrase fake news will not be coming out of the White House anymore.
Yeah. Carla Baranauckas, our colleague, asks a question here. Let's put that up. How do you deal with news figures when they think you're a horrible person? I was also going to ask it the reverse, when you think they're a horrible person.
You just screen it out, and usually they're saying it to the public in reaction. But I find if you don't react, if you just act as if, oh, okay, he called me that, and then you keep asking more questions, and you keep asking for interview, and I don't fight back. That's a fight that it's not worth it, because you're a reporter, you're not an antagonist. So that's what I do. And I've even in my work on the travel and tourism industry, the backlash was extraordinary. And I just sort of everything is fact checked. My book was lawyered, and I'll stand by what I do. I don't get into that argument.
And of course, things went really bad for the travel industry this past year. The hope is that things could be, when they say build back better than what went wrong. But we know that it's very hard when the bottom line is what drives these industries, as they have to for a variety of reasons. Let's take a look at the rest of the paper. Any section you want to jump to first?
Well, in the review section, I was surprised at how much I liked the article on everybody should keep reading picture books. You're not too old.
So this is by the editor of the book review, Pamela Paul, and she says, you're not too old for picture books. There are real wizards. These are the real wizards of the literary world. So this would be surprising for many folks to hear that. So tell us about what you agreed with in this.
Well, my young grandson, it's my favorite thing to do is to have him on my lap, reminding me when my kids were that young. And I'd forgotten the great pleasure I took from seeing what now Raphael likes about a picture book and what he fastens onto, and so on and so forth. And she explained it to me. She explained that there are two levels here, that the art is one level and the text is another level. And let the child tell you what to read. Go back, mom, go back, grandma, go forward, whatever. And that, of course, that's why we buy fancy coffee table books too, because we like those pictures. And it just was so reassuring without me understanding why it was such a joy and a treat to start reading picture books again with my grandson.
Pamela writes, Picture books are the carrot that motivates the emerging reader, frustrated and bored silly by the phonemic progression from cat to mat. Unlike most early readers, picture books are vibrant and appealing in a way likely to give children who grow up swiping iPads the stimulation they've come to expect. Picture books also offer much more sophisticated language and storytelling, the assumption being that adults are reading these books aloud, so children needn't struggle over them themselves. So that's interesting. By the way, I'm curious about your thoughts on Rush Limbaugh and Frank Bruni's argument, speaking ill of the dead needn't mean cackling over their demise. Must we dance on Rush Limbaugh's grave? I know lots of people would say yes.
I always enjoy Frank Bruni's take on something. He's very sensitive to the subtler issues of how we show our values, and I respected that a lot. Yeah, I mean, the internet was crazy with ding dong, but he makes you think about Rush Limbaugh in a way more seriously, which in some ways is more damning. And there we are. There's Myanmar.
Yeah, let's. Here's an editorial, an unsigned editorial. I've actually seen fewer of them these days. They seem to run the columnists on this page.
Right.
But this one is an unsigned editorial. Support the resistance in Myanmar. The world must get behind Burmese protesters fighting against military rule. And Rush Douthat has Rush Limbaugh's legacy, and Maureen Dowd says the tale of the untamable shrew Republicans are still trying to muzzle a smack-talking Trump. And are they? I don't know how many of them are doing
again,
that.
You have to read Maureen Dowd whenever, all the time. But which she, oddly enough, reading that, it reminded me, I haven't heard from Trump. I had the opposite reaction. Of course, I mean, he's going to be speaking at the conservative conference soon. But I said, oh, well, yeah, Republicans are worrying about it, but Maureen made me realize he's not the conversation anymore. I can't tell you the last time he said anything, which it makes the dialogue a lot better. But yeah.
And here is Nick Kristoff's column. What are sperm telling us? Endocrine disrupting chemicals may be hurting sperm counts and egg quality. And of course, Nick has done a lot of coverage out of Southeast Asia.
Right. Very, very thoughtful, and my God, the energy the guy has.
Yeah, it's true. When apes start coughing, humans are spreading the coronavirus to other animals. And that's scary.
Well, that's that whole globalization thing, that the front page, what it did to me this morning. I mean, we get things from animals and give it back, and we have never acknowledged the full ramifications of globalization, and what we call it climate crisis on the one hand, virus here, but it's one system.
Here, Carla says that she used to live in the same building as Rush Limbaugh. So I want to hear some stories offline, Carla, about that. And Rose says, I loved the story on the importance and dismissal of picture books. My husband and I talked about it. So important.
Good.
And Ellen saying you don't hear about him because he's no longer on on Twitter. So, but he has also not gone on camera. We've heard his voice on Fox and things, but not like that. Where else would you like to go? We have time for maybe one more thing that we can look at.
Business. Once again, they're amazing stories. And doing the boredom economy sort of brought everything together that we've been reading about, bits and pieces about which, now that we have time on our hand, we can't be distracted, we can't go out. What are we spending our money on? And we know that we're saving a lot more. That's put everybody, but where are we putting, we're spiffing up our homes, we're doing groceries, et cetera, but put it all, games, books, movies at home, everything at home. And it sort of told me, oh, we're all doing it. It's not just my husband and I.
This is a story by Joel Stein about startups of engineering foam meats, eggs, and dairy products from fungi to yeast cells. And so this is a story about dinner parties of the future. I felt vaguely superior, as if we were leaving the animal age.
Did you want to eat any of it?
I don't know. Though I got to say, Beyond Meat, which is, I don't think it's cells, it's just plant-based stuff that we eat in our house, but not the engineered stuff yet. All right. Here is the retiring column. I just want to use this opportunity to tell folks about our next set of guests who are going to be with us, including Ron Lieber, who will be here from the business section of the New York Times. He's the Your Money columnist and author of The Price You Pay for College. It's a new book. That's next Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And then Cheryl McCarthy will be with us, host of City University's one-to-one interview show. And she's a former Baltimore Sun, Evening Sun, Newsday, and New York Daily News columnist and writer and journalist. So this is a great run, starting with Elizabeth, Ron, and Cheryl these next 3 Sundays. So great to have them here. And I hope everyone will be able to join us. And please share this show that you're watching right now. Tag a friend, as some people have been doing, and they can watch as soon as we're off the air in just a few minutes. So with that, I'll just come back to Elizabeth and ask her to give us some final thoughts about the role of women in covering war. Do you feel like it's the same patronizing energy that kept women from advancing in the military? That also, this idea that we need to protect women, that kept women from being able to do the kind of war reporting that they could have done and should have done. And you also saw the story this week of how 2 women generals in the military did not get their promotions because the Pentagon worried that Trump would go against them because they were women. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's sort of all of the above. There was the official ban on women journalists covering the battlefield during World War II. A lot of women got around it, but that was the ban, and was only permanently removed because of what women did during Vietnam. So that there's the institutional problems, and then the media. It took lawsuits, New York Times women, to open up the newsroom to women. So that was another institutional problem. And then there's the cultural where colleagues told the women that they didn't belong, and in a couple of instances went out of their way to try to make them fail. So there's been change, big change. After Vietnam, the next time the United States went to war, women from were staff media reporters sent to the Gulf War. So you had the beginning of the Christiane Amanpour era. So that's a big deal. The media were sent their women. They had full pay, they had health insurance, they had all the stuff that we women in Vietnam didn't have. And the military had opened up the battlefield to women so they could cover it just like the men. Have the cultural biases changed? No. Not all of them, obviously not. And it's a little bit forward, a little bit back. Do women in the media think they have the same opportunities as men? Some will say they still don't think they do. Sexual harassment, which was high in the war when there were just a few women and a lot of men. We know that that's not over. So overall, yes, it's improved. Is everything gone? No.
You mentioned, Elizabeth, that women had to pay their own way to the battles or the battle zone to go to. American journalists had to pay their own way. Women journalists to get to Southeast Asia to cover the war. That's shocking to hear that.
And very, very few women were paid. It was almost entirely freelancers, and because women were foreign correspondents, and it wasn't just Americans; it was Europeans and Australians too. So it was pretty global, and that's a huge difference. I think the problem now for battlefield coverage for men and women is too often it's being done by freelancers, and that's really tough. I think that the Times is one of the most responsible news organizations for making sure that their staff, have all that's needed to be protected and covering. But still, there are way too many freelancers who news organizations we know they don't send people out the way they used to, so they use freelancers, and freelancers do not have they don't have any of the safety net that they need, from equipment to protect themselves, health insurance, all those things that you need.
There's a quick question. How do you feel about photographs of the battlefield? As a family member of mine, says Donato, captured World War II photo essay in Germany. My understanding is there are limitations on photography in the battlefield.
That depends. I can speak I can tell you that in my experience, the photographs not published by the media were the ones of bodies being, cut up, beheadings. We saw beheadings of the enemy soldiers on both sides, cutting off ears and that sort of thing. Just that kind of photograph wasn't allowed. But the other one that's been universal is not showing a soldier who's dead before the family's allowed. That's universal. And now with embedding, there are all kinds of rules in the U.S. Army, U.S. military, on reporters and photographers about what is allowed and what isn't allowed.
Thank you. We had a comment from Kathleen that said relying on freelancers is completely unfair. And Sudha says, that's Neil's mom, Elizabeth, thank you for sharing your rich experience with us. Highly educational. And,
thank you, Sudha.
Yeah, and Lily says thank you. Lots of comments coming in. People are
Lily.
so thrilled to spend this time with you, and we're so grateful that you would take the time to be with us today. I want to point out that we had a comment from one of our doctor friends, Sujana Chandrasekhar, said that your title of your book, You Don't Belong Here, is something that women in every industry have been told, so not just on the battlefield or as war correspondents, but women have been told you don't belong here.
That resonates. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So with that, we'll let you go. We have a couple of quick thank yous to share and some promotions. But thank you so much, Elizabeth. You were awesome. And we learned a lot. Everybody, please follow her on Twitter. Please check out her website. And Eve says, yes, thank you for a great interview. And the book is called You Don't Belong Here, about 3 women war correspondents. Miriam says, I came into this late, but you can watch this replay. That's right. We'll be live. The recording will start from the beginning as soon as we're off the air here. So let's bring Neil on to give us our final moments here.
Well, thank you.
Elizabeth, thank you very much.
It's
great to have you on the show today. Really fascinating discussion. Again, for people who may have joined us late, our guest was Elizabeth Becker, former New York Times reporter, also worked with the Washington Post, covered the war for the Washington Post, reported from one of 2 Western journalists to cover the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, and is the author of You Don't Belong Here, How 3 Women Rewrote the Story of War. And this was definitely a great conversation with her. So thank you, Elizabeth. For the as far as our upcoming events are concerned, Shri mentioned that we have 2 great guests after Elizabeth, Ron Lieber and Cheryl McCarthy, February 28th and March 7th. And then right after this show, Shri is going to take my role, helping to produce the show. He mentioned Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar. She is one of the co-hosts with Dr. Marina Kurian of She's on Call. This week's episode, it'll air at 11 o'clock, 11 a.m. Eastern time. And this week's show focuses on COVID vaccines and high-risk groups with two great guests, Dr. Michael Lovitz from Penn Medicine and Dr. Stella Sappho, an HIV primary care physician and health equity advocate. So please definitely make sure you catch that show at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. She's on call on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And as Shri mentioned earlier, and I want to make sure that we give a shout out to our production team, Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranauckas. We've been live on Elizabeth's Facebook page as well. Paula is on Shri's Facebook page, sharing links and engaging with the audience. Steve Taylor has been on Shri's LinkedIn page, and Carla has been on Elizabeth's Facebook page. Thank you again, Elizabeth, for letting us stream directly to both your Facebook and Twitter accounts. Carla Baranauckas is also the editor of The Local Connection, which is a great resource for journalists. The Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University brings the Local Connection newsletter every week. They offer story ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips. And as a final shout out, Shri, say something about our work with MuckRack. They've been a great supporter of the New York Times Read Along, and you've done some work with them. You've hosted some shows, and you've also did a course for them.
Thank you to MuckRack and our friends there, Greg Gallant and Mike Schneider and Lee Semmel, for helping us bring you the New York Times Read Along. Please check out MuckRack and all the great work they do. And if you'd like to be a sponsor of this show or of our newsletter, which you can find at srinet.substack.com, we'd love to talk to you. You can just contact me, sri@sri.net, or neil@digimentors.group. And a reminder that Digimentors produces conferences and summits and webinars and talk shows like this. So if you are interested in, many of you have noticed how professional and different the way we do our shows is. And so we would love to talk to you about working with you for the coming year. We do virtual events as well as hybrid events. So talk to us, please. And you can see our email addresses on the bottom of the screen. Do contact Neil and Sri if you can.
And Shri, before we go, we'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about your newsletter that came out just this morning during the show.
Yeah, this was about the tech giants need to pay the news industry. You've seen this news out of Australia. So my colleague Zach Peterson and I produced this newsletter. And this image you're seeing here is just a tweet from Kara Brown that says, "I cannot believe how much money we've already donated this past year because the government can't do its job." And we've turned into a country that uses GoFundMe and celebrates when people do great GoFundMes. But is that what we should be doing as a country? That's a whole other conversation. But please check out srinet.substack.com. And thank you, everyone, for being with us on this show. We're here every single Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. And this is Bob Anthony's Tech Tip. And this time, solar power to the rescue, maybe, talking about all the solar options that you now have on your tech products. All right, folks, with that, we will say thank you to everybody. And thank you to the great team led by Neil that produces this episode of the New York Times Read Along. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great Sunday, and we'll see you next Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, live or later, as we talk to Ron Lieber, the Your Money columnist at the New York Times and author of a big new book about paying for college. Thanks, everybody.